You know how sometimes you think to yourself, whoa, if this went down just a little bit differently, my life would have been completely different. In today's episode, we will talk about one of the biggest Chinese restaurant family legacies in the United States, Frank Fat, and how all of that almost didn't happen without a Keno game and a motor launch boat. Hi, my name is Christy, and this is the American Chinese Food Show. Frank Fat is coined the great American immigrant success story. His restaurant, Frank Fat's, is the oldest restaurant owned exclusively by one family in the capital of the state of California, Sacramento. In 2013, his restaurant won the America's Classic Award from James Beard Foundation. His beginning was not unlike many early immigrants who came to try to make it work in the new land, though. He came from a small village, Yunhing, in Taishan, Guangdong, at age 16 in 1919, searching for his father. When Frank met his father in Ohio, his father just gave him some money and said, "Go make a life." So Frank went to Sacramento looking for his uncle. He worked his butt off. He washed dishes at the Sutter Club, helped out at a beauty salon, picked fruit in Ileton and Walnut Grove, worked in a laundry with a cousin in Ohio, and spent time working in restaurants in Cincinnati, Grand Rapids, and Chicago learning English. Even when he was running his own restaurant, he put in 14 to 16 hours a day. It's not hard to succeed for someone as dedicated as Frank Fat, if luck is on his side. I'm going to talk about a few lucky moments in his life that helped build his legacy. When he was 24, after working, saving, and paying off his immigrant debts, the travel fare, the papers, and forced immigration papers, they were expensive. He booked passage home to meet the bride arranged for him. When he and 5 friends made a stop at Yokohama, they had so much fun, they spent all of their money, and they didn't realize they just missed the ship. Luckily, one friend in that group, who's famous for being frugal, George Kwan, paid a motor launch for everyone to catch the ship to eventually make it back home. Frank and George arrived on the same boat from China years ago, and they became friends. George was not a nobody either. He founded one of the earliest Chinese-American supermarket chains. Exactly what you'd expect for someone famous for being frugal. You can tell Frank was a great friend and had a lot of fun doing what he did, from spending all his money in Yokohama as a young man to celebrating the 50th anniversary of his restaurant with a 6-day event of quote-unquote fun, food, and madness. That's how the 5K Fat to Fat Run and 4K Walk came about. And for the grand reopening after remodel in 1980 along his 80th birthday celebration, the Fat family closed off the entire block and invited 4,000 people for the street party. Frank Fat ran restaurants in Lake Tahoe around 1942. Why Lake Tahoe? A year before that, Fat and his family had stayed the night at a cabin in Bijou, only to be told the next morning they must leave, as Asians were not welcome. He turned the tables by buying into the North Shore business with a group of businessmen. Taniva Ho, Calvada Lodge restaurant, and 7 businesses around it. He said, "I wanted for people to have a place to go up there, where they would be welcome." Yes, Frank Fat welcomed everyone. Look at his radiant face in this rare video from 1950 taken in Frank Fat's. Who doesn't want a fun, good friend with a great smile? Let's go to the next lucky moment. In 1939, Frank was working as a waiter at his uncle's restaurant, Hong King Lum. It had a basement gambling hall. A state official came in and asked him to go downstairs and place a Keno bet. The guy won $2,000, about $45,000 today, but not realizing it, left before Frank could return with the money. Frank held on to the winnings until he saw the men several weeks later. The men decided to lend him some capital. Along with money scrimped by Frank's wife, Mary, who was working at a local cannery, Frank Fat realized his dream of opening his own restaurant. The press called Frank Fat's restaurant the legislature's third house. A reporter who ate there in 1987 on a weeknight saw the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the assembly, the president pro tem of the Senate, the minority leaders of both houses, and a former governor. The bar was jammed with lobbyists. Why? Then Assemblyman Willie Brown said, "It's not the food that has made Frank Fat such a popular political hangout, but the fact that the restaurateur can keep secrets on the wheeling and dealing done over drinks there. Many deals were made at Fat's over cocktails and food, like the famous napkin deal on a sweeping reform in the state's liability laws in 1987. Sure, they have these private booths for privacy upstairs, but in the end, it's because Frank was trustworthy. With the capital Frank borrowed, he purchased a rundown restaurant on the bad side of L Street. The location was a storage, then a speakeasy, and eventually a restaurant starting in the 1920s. Special chicken dinner for 50 cents at La Rosa Italian restaurant, ravioli and spaghetti at San Carlo Cafe, even with a Morocco cocktail room added in. And a year before Frank Fats moved in, the Trocadero Cafe serving filet mignon, squab, and chicken polonaise. It never did quite well enough to stay in business. Frank later recalled, L Street was a very poor location. On two sides of my place, it was very dark and nobody walked on the street. All my friends said I'm crazy. They said even a dog wouldn't go there. Then why did Frank choose that location? Sacramento's Chinatown was once much bigger and thriving. Yeah, it's hard to imagine that when you visit the remnants of what's left, confined to 2 blocks today. Sacramento was called Yifao, the second port, the first being San Francisco, of course, by early Chinese miners. There were approximately 25 Chinese restaurants in the city of Sacramento in 1939, according to the city directory. Most were closer to the Sacramento River, with the I Street area being the economic and social center. China Clipper Cafe was the closest to the Capitol building on 10th between J and K. Frank Fat's became the Chinese restaurant closest to the Capitol, not even 2 blocks away. Yes, many politicians are busy and a little bit lazy, but does a block or 2 distance make such a difference? Yes, especially if you play the rest of the cards right. China Clipper was opened by the chairman of the Chinese Benevolent Association and managed by a chairman of the Chinese School Board. You know, old school folks serving old school dishes. Bird's nest soup, chow mein, chop suey. Here comes a young man in his 30s. While Frank Fat served Chinese food from day one, the selling point was choosing your own cut of steak from the refrigerator. There's also the now famous New York steak Frank style, with onions and oyster sauce. Even the naming is thought through. Most of the Chinese restaurants then were named after the owners. Chiu Lam, Feng Yi, Wang Jiu. Not the most Caucasian-friendly names. Frank Fat's Chinese name is actually Dong Sai Fat. Dong Sai Fat. Sai means always. Fat means prosperity, Frank said, patting his stomach. He swapped out his last name with his first name. Where did Frank come from? Oh, I just picked up the Frank. Can you imagine if he used his real last name, Dong, for his restaurant? I had to struggle for 8 months before I broke even. But strategic decisions made from years of experience in the restaurant industry beforehand paid off for Frank Fat, and the restaurant just celebrated their 80th birthday a few years ago. That's it for today's episode. If you like our content, subscribe to the channel. See you soon.